This episode of The Rookie Hunter is sponsored by North Arm Knives. North Arm Knives are handcrafted and sold directly through a father and son team right here in British Columbia. Choose from a selection of outdoor knives, kitchen knives, and the brand new folding knife from northarmknives.com. They ship internationally and guarantee all their work. Callie and I use their products and give them our stamp of approval. Go to northarmknives.com. Hey guys, welcome to episode 40. Today on the show we have Adam Janke. If that name sounds familiar, you might recognize it. He is the host of Beyond the Kill, an excellent hunting podcast that if you're not listening to already, you should probably head over to iTunes and subscribe to that one. He's also the man behind the Journal of Mountain Hunting. Each month he puts together an e-zine which you can subscribe to for free. All you have to do is head over to his website and sign up. That's the journalofmountainhunting.com. You can also stream the podcast from there, and there's a bunch of great resources, so make sure to check that out. As mentioned before, Kelly and I are going to do an Ask Us Anything sometime within the next week or so here. So it's not too late to submit your questions, whatever they might be. You can send an email to the Rookie Hunter Podcast at gmail.com, or you can reach out to us through our website, which is therookieHunter.com. While you're on the website, you can also donate to the show. Those donations go a long way and help us keep the show running. If you don't have any spare change, that's totally cool too. You can help us out by leaving a rating or review in iTunes. And I know I ask it all the time, but it does mean a lot and it does help us reach more listeners. So please head over to iTunes and leave us a rating or review. Lots of good stuff coming up over the next couple of weeks, but let's get into this one. Sit back, relax, crack a cold beer, and enjoy episode 40 with Adam Janke. For sure. Definitely.
So last question before we roll is who drives the Ford?
That's me.
Oh, that's too bad, Cal.
Yeah.
I'm a Chev guy.
Actually, you know what? I went in for a Chev, and then as I was driving by the Ford dealership, I saw that it was used, and I saw it there, and I'm like, oh, damn, that's pretty nice.
Oh, no, they're great looking
So
trucks.
then the back seat is what sold me.
Oh, really?
It's totally flat back there. Like, I could put a freezer back there with the seats up. So, like, with dogs, or if you want to sleep in the cab or whatever, that's a major selling point. There's quite a story behind that truck, too, which we don't have to get into. But it ends with an engine replacement, but I didn't have to pay for it.
Typical Ford, though. I mean, it's a bit basic Ford. I've got a great story about my Chev truck coming out of Hunt Up North that very likely will keep me a Chev man for the rest of my life, because we fucked that truck and drove it 1,600 kilometers home. Like, nice. I mean, buried it in like stem to stern in Jack Pine. Had to chainsaw our own like road, like a 20-yard swath out. Yeah. Had a trailer and quads on the back. Like, just it looked like someone had taken a can opener to the driver's side. I couldn't get out of my side because we were pinned up against the tree. Yeah. It was and it just took a lick and kept on ticking.
Nice.
Yeah. It's amazing the relationship you form with your trucks, eh?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
You rely on them.
They
you take care of them, they'll take care of you.
Yeah, they do get us places.
Yeah.
For sure.
That's not bad, eh?
Not too bad at all.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, we're already rolling, so Kelly, we might as well tell us what's on tap.
Yeah, so Adam was gracious enough to bring in some Yukon Brewing beer. It's a Kolsch called Yukon Holiday, which is awesome. It tastes great too, by the way.
Yeah, it is.
And it says celebrating 20 years, limited edition Canada 150 series. So
nice.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Beautiful.
We're going to throw this one up on the website.
Yeah, we got to update the list, actually. We got a wall of beer next to you, so we might crack into a few more of those before we call it a night here.
You guys provide taxi service after these podcasts, right?
Yeah, I got a bike out back. I think we'll double you home.
Yeah. I ride Oscar.
Nice.
So the third voice you're hearing is Adam Janke. He's from Beyond the Kill podcast and also Journal of Mountain Hunting. Adam, thanks for coming and hanging out with us, making the trip down.
Yeah, thanks,
it's
man.
cool that what we found out after being on your podcast that you and Kelly live about 2 blocks away from each other, and all this time we thought you were on the coast, and turns out we live in the same town. So convenient.
Yeah, no, definitely. And thanks for having me on, guys. I've been excited to make this happen. And yeah, a lot of people, well, I've talked about living on the coast a fair bit. I mean, when we launched the site, the Journal of Mountain Hunting, and the podcast, I was still living on the coast in Vancouver area, I should say, North Shore. And so depending on how many podcasts a person has listened to, I get emails all the time saying, hey, let's try to get together, whatever, on the coast. And very thankfully, I get to say, sorry, dude, I've moved to greener pastures. So,
yeah, for sure.
I was definitely stoked to hear that you guys were Kelowna based as well.
Yeah.
I don't know how many podcasts it took me of yours to listen to figure it out, but it was like, we got to make this happen.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny. I don't know if Kelly discovered it before, but I found your podcast after we had Kareem Shaya from Outpost. And so he let us know that he'd been on your podcast, so we went and checked it out and then listened to it ever since then. So it's kind of cool how the world works. And now you're sitting in the studio with us here, so that's cool, man.
Sitting in the studio that I am so jealous that you guys have. As I said when you guys came on, like this is a real step up for me. So I'm obviously not just moving up in the world in terms of moving locales, but moving up in the podcasting world by being here in this studio.
Well, there's a studio here if you ever need it for any guests that you bring in. So
we should host like I don't know, some sort of like podcasting event for the hunting world and just bring a whole bunch of people in. That'd be pretty cool.
Live podcasting?
Yeah.
Yeah. We were part of the BC Interior Sportsman Show, which is cool, but I would like that to become something bigger. And I think it's cool because they're very focused on like community and in BC and stuff like that. But I sort of I'm always thinking bigger picture, and it'd be cool to kind of bring people in from all over North America to that event. And then that would benefit us as podcasters as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Bringing all these people.
Well, and people like, I've kind of done the reverse because of our close relationship with the Wild Sheep Foundation, have spent a lot of time at some of the bigger events, like the more, I don't know if you would call them worldwide. I mean, geez, they're in Reno. That's not exactly worldwide, but pretty marquee events in the mountain hunting world that do draw people from all over the place. And because of the young family at home, I've got to really pick my battles as far as the events I can go to. Yeah. And I was pretty choked because it was actually my mom that had mentioned the Interior Sportsman Show and was saying, are you going? And would have loved to have made it, but weekends are pretty precious time with the family, and
for sure.
And because of some of the other travel, it's hard to make some of the more local ones. But it's integral that we get crossover, I think, in those two communities, right? And the cool thing I love about traveling down to the U.S. to talk to people about this whole hunting thing is like BC is the land of milk and honey, right?
Yeah.
And people just eyes kind of like widen and or they get kind of ticked when they hear you're from BC and have all the opportunity that we do have here. But people have, it's interesting, right? Because a lot of people, I think, like to disparage Americans, or I should say a lot of Canadians like to disparage Americans for being pretty, insular in their thinking and their geographical knowledge. But, you go down to the US and talk hunting, and there'll be guys that know more about certain pockets of BC than I do.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, I've only been in BC for just over a decade now, but these guys are, 40s, 50s, whatever, do a guided hunt every year.
Yeah.
And they know more about lakes and rivers and watersheds and some of the history of BC and the hunting and guide outfitting industry in BC than I could ever hope to. Right. So it's really cool to see something that is, so elemental to, for sure, the three of us. And one would assume everyone listening, that really does, whatever, transcend borders and cultures in a lot of ways. Right. So,
yeah. For sure.
Yeah, Mike and I have been trying to get down there for a couple shows. We're going to try to hit the BHA this year. It didn't work out, so next year I think we're going to try that one. What would you recommend? I'm not sure how many you've been to, but what do you think you should...
I've only done Sheep Show. That's been one... That's, I'm biased, again, because Wild Sheep Foundation was one of the first sponsors on the website to really sort of support us and like in a big way and really get behind what we were trying to do with the digital magazine, the journal, and then the podcast as well. So that was one of the first ones that, well, I'll back that up. Everyone I talked to in the industry in the early days, and I didn't know anybody in the industry. I was just, average Joe hunter and whatever, started this thing and went after it, with, all guns blazing. But everyone I talked to in the industry was like, that's the show to go to if you're into the, quote unquote mountain hunting, right? Everyone's very like-minded. It's a really good group of people. Sheep Show itself, obviously everything that happens there goes towards wild sheep conservation.
Right.
Obviously a great cause. And so having gone now, this past one in January was my third year in a row. I'm certainly biased because A, it's the only one I've been to, but B, it is for sure probably one of the most close-knit, like-minded group of hunters I've ran into. I know a lot of guys that go to SCI say it's quite a show, like you should go to it, even just once to go, but it's a lot more of that, I don't know what I would call it, sort of that rock star sort of pomp and circumstance sort of show and style of hunting, right? Where a sheep show is, you're going to see guys walking around that look like they don't have two pennies to scratch together that have been on 20 sheep hunts, right? And at 60 can still backpack better than the three of us combined, right? So you just get a really interesting mix of people. BHA is one that I've not been to. Definitely want to go. In fact, next year
maybe the three of us should team up. And
that would be awesome. Carpool down because it's not that far, right?
It's
in Boise.
So I think we looked it up. It's like a 10-hour drive or something like that.
That's
somewhere.
That's
well, Missoula would have been closer, but it's in Boise, Idaho.
Yeah.
Right.
This next year coming up. So.
Right. Well, I mean, geez, with the drive times we're used to here in BC, especially what you guys are lining up for this fall. 10 hours. I mean, that's just north of Prince George. It's nothing, right?
Exactly.
That is nothing.
Yeah. Let's back up to the Journal of Mountain Hunting and just kind of let us know how that all came together.
Yeah, I'll try not to whatever. There's obviously there's a long version of every story, and I'm bad for defaulting there. So
we got time and lots of beers.
that's true. That's true, and I've got hipster cabs ready for me, aka the single speed bike, right? So I grew up hunting and fishing in Eastern Ontario, rural area, but an hour west of Ottawa, area called the Ottawa Valley. Hometown I grew up in because that's what our address read as was Douglas, Ontario. But Douglas is a tiny town, like 400 people, let's say.
Oh, wow.
And we were outside of that, like on a farm. So, the whole outdoors, whatever lifestyle, let's call it, was just something I grew up with. And it was really my number one passion for the bulk of my young life. As I got later into high school, various sporting, commitments kind of took over, ate up weekends and that sort of stuff. And I went off to school in Southern Ontario. And I spent a long time, probably the better part of, 8-9 years stuck in big cities. So I didn't really get out a whole lot and went off into my career and kind of took a break from hunting, to be honest, and fishing for that matter as well. I got a couple fishing trips in with my dad and that sort of thing. But I guess hunting kind of went on the back burner, and then moved out west in 2006. And right before that move, I was just getting really I wouldn't even call it like city fatigued. I was getting like downright like claustrophobic. Like I would literally hit a Thursday, and at this point I was actually living in Toronto. I was there for 4 months, 3 months too long. And I'd literally hit a Thursday and I'd get like this near panic, right? And I'd literally just throw stuff in my car, finish work on Friday and just book it back home to the Ottawa Valley. Yeah. And so something had kind of been latent, I guess, right? Mm-hmm. And so shortly after that, I moved west and had started to rekindle the love for hunting and started to mule deer hunt, that sort of stuff. Met a buddy who was into it, grew up in Alberta, that really wanted to get into hunting as well. And then the floodgates just opened, and it just became yet again my number one, obsession and passion. Yeah, nice. And so fast forward a few years, been working in my career, and we had our first kid, and our first boy, Hudson, who's just over 3 now. And I think a lot of parents go through a real sort of reset when that happens, ask themselves a lot of big questions and, what am I doing? Am I in the right place to do this? What's the kind of, whatever father, husband I want to be, all that sort of stuff. And behind the scenes, I started to get pretty tired of my career and read a few books that kind of inspired me to think outside the box. And I'll never forget it. One day, driving down to Portland where my in-laws now live. They're originally from here in Kelowna, but my wife's dad got moved down to Portland for work. This was late night. Hudson's asleep in the back. My wife's KO'd, like doing the head bob and shotgun. And I'd had all these ideas, and they're all most of them were completely harebrained, right? And it just kind of popped into my head this idea of a digital magazine. Now I'd been having a lot of conversations with a couple of buddies, kind of around the campfire, having beers, that sort of thing, about some of the frustrations we were having with finding good hunting information online. And there's lots of great forums out there. HBC, obviously one, Rock Slide's another.
Yeah.
What's the other one now? Big Shots BC or something like that?
I haven't come across that one yet.
Yeah, me neither.
That was coming out just as I was sort of getting, I don't want to say tired of HBC, but there seemed to be a transition point for HBC a few years ago where it went from, a good mix of the typical BS that you expect on a forum, a fair amount of trolling, and then, the old guard of guys and gals, I should say, but people that had been around for a long time that had really good information. And it just seemed to kind of, the proportions seemed to shift, where there's a lot more BS, a lot more, finger pointing, and not a whole lot of help happening.
Yeah, we're finding some of that now a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, so anyways, that was getting frustrating, and that was one of my best and primary sources of hunting information, especially here in BC. My wife would literally come downstairs in the morning, because I'd usually get up before her, and she's like, "Are you on that fucking website again?" Right? And so started to look at subscribing to some US-based magazines, like Eastman's and Western Hunter and that sort of thing. And, whatever, they'd have the little postcard inside, and it would say, $30 for 6 issues or 8 issues or whatever it was. And then you'd plug it in online, and it'd be like $70 to get into Canada, right? Which is just ridiculous. So a couple of these things were kind of transpiring where I was like, well, and this is, in conversations with some of the guys that got it started with me, we're like, we either can't find information that we want, and sometimes that's information, sometimes that's just stories, right? Like one of my favorite things on HBC was guys hunting stories, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we just were finding that there was less of that available, and to get good information was getting harder and harder to do. And then compare that with, the expense of getting in these US-based print magazines. We're kind of like, shit, like there's not really a great option out there. And it was one of those things where I was like, well, we can't be the only ones having this problem, right? And when those first few conversations happened, not much really came of it. And then, as I explained, it was on this drive down to Portland where I was just like, shoot, well, starting a digital, basically an online magazine, can't be that hard. And anyways, long story long, looked into it, figured out how to build a website, and that was that. And then had to figure out how to do the rest. But, but it just sort of took on a life of its own, right? It was surprising, in fact, just how much demand there was for something of that nature, right?
And you had a pretty good reaction rate off the top with that thing, eh?
Yeah, I mean, we seeded it on a couple of forums, to the chagrin of some forums, because we were kind of flouting forum rules.
Yeah,
we were technically,
they don't like it when you, hey, check this out.
We do a bit of that.
Yeah, no, I know. Well, it was, whatever. This is just the way my brain works. I kind of figure it was a technicality, right? Like I wasn't selling anything.
Yeah.
And, to subscribe at that time, and still to the Drill Mountain Hunting is completely free, right?
Exactly.
It's just your email, which has value. I get that. So I was kind of like, well, whatever. It's not really selling something.
It's just another resource. That's the way I look at it. It's just like the forums are, right? It's the same, same idea.
So yeah, I think I got blacklisted from Alberta Outdoors Forum, but
nice.
Whatever. Such is life.
Yeah.
Sorry, Alberta listeners. I mean, we put up like a pre-registration site, which is basically like a homepage, landing page, whatever you want to call it, a list of the articles we were going to run. So I mean, probably the biggest insult a person, just a complete side note here, a person can say is like, oh, how's that blog going, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I hate that because, blog is usually something that's written by one person and one person only, right? And I do, a fair bit of the writing. Like I usually write at least one article a month. Mm-hmm. Not always. Let's say on average, probably one article a month. But the rest is, sourced by the writers,
Yeah.
or it's curated content that we find from someone else and republish on our site.
Yeah.
And so, but it very much is, a magazine format in that it's a set number of columns that we publish every month. And so we put that list up, and then just like a sign up page, right? And in 2 days we had like just shy of 1,000 people sign
That's
up,
awesome.
which, in real internet world, that's not a huge number, but
No, but it says something now right off the top like
Yeah.
that people are obviously looking for something like that. So
yeah. So yeah, anyways, it just went from there.
Cool. Yeah, a lot of it's a presentation too. I think I found that before we started podcasting. I was looking for resources, and then you find a nice website like that that's like, you're right, you have the articles about learning and teaching, and then you have some good stories in there too, and all the stories have amazing photography and all that kind of stuff. So that draws you in right away.
Yeah.
It's like do it yourself Alaska caribou hunt, and then you look through the photos, it's like, oh man, I got to go up there.
it makes you want to do it.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, and that was, coming back to say like HBC or Rockslide for that matter. HBC is where I spent most of my time, so we'll focus on that. Like, there's no question, like that's where, what I loved HBC for is the guys that took the time to write, good stories.
Yeah.
And I don't mean like perfectly written and, awesome grammar and all that stuff. Like just good.
Paints
real,
a picture.
Yeah, just good real stories with good imagery, right? And that's something that was really, really important when we started the site of the digital magazine, and try really hard to maintain that sort of, I don't know, bar, I guess. It's hard, man. Like, there's a lot of really good stories that get sent in that I'd love to publish, like just wicked stories about guys enduring hardship or getting it done and against all odds, and they just don't have the imagery to go with it, right? But it's so important as far as drawing people into those stories, right? Which probably one of the number one benefits of the online space is it's so easy to share those stories and just really draw people into the experience, which is, if I could summarize, I mean, that's the whole point of the site and really the podcast is this experience of hunting is so crazy, right? Like it's so, like rich and deep and what, I mean, I struggle for words because I don't even know that there's one word I could use to describe it, right?
I don't think so, yeah.
And that's what we try to do on the site.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think photography, like, I kind of got into photography a little bit before we started hunting, but I'm going to spin it back around this year and make sure, because before it's always like, I'm not going to pack my camera
I'm going to hold you to it because we've said this before.
No, but this year's full blown, like, because you go out and your success rate's not 100%.
Right.
It's not even 50%.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you have your camera there and you're capturing that experience and like, that's a big win too.
You got time to kind of fuck around and get some good shots. And
every time I brought it, we've come back with something cool.
Yeah, at least one good photo, which is all you can hope for, I guess.
It's kind of like hunting too.
Are you into photography as well? Or?
I am as a consumer of photography. I'm not. Like we've got a DSLR that I'll take you out, but I'm as much as I just said, it's hard to get good articles or stories with good imagery.
Yeah.
I'm also the worst guy for leaving it in my pack, even when I have it with me, right?
Yeah.
And that's I think one of the big mistakes a lot of people make is they, obviously if they don't take it, you can't take photos, but then they'll bury it in their pack and they'll be in the middle of doing something and like, I just want to crest this hill.
It's just one more thing.
Yeah, it's just one more thing to stop and pull out, right? And
I'm the worst for that too. Mike's great. Like most of the photos that are on the Instagram, he's the guy.
I've always got my iPhone handy, so when we're hiking, I can just flick it out real quick and snap a couple because you got to have something, but...
Yeah, and I'm always like, I don't want to take my gloves off. I don't want to go in my pack and get my phone. I don't want to do this. And I'm kind of like, just let's get the thing done, get to the spot. But yeah, you're kind of more enjoying the scenery and snapping photos. And then when you get back home, it's like, oh, damn, I should have took some photos too.
Well, yeah, but guys like you and I, Kelly, are the first to say, hey, dude, can you send me those photos? Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Even though we're not the ones putting in the work to get it done.
Yeah.
And those photos are like, I mean, they're as much the trophies on the wall as anything else, right? And then they're easier to share. They tell, I was going to say more of the story that's maybe not fair because nice whatever mounted pick your species.
Yeah,
there's a story behind that, right? And that's what a lot of people talk about when they say, I was listening to your podcast with Randy, right?
Nice.
And just earlier today, because I had kind of been chopping it up, unfortunately. So I got the chance to finish it today. And he made that point, right? He said, there's a story to that, let's put it, kind of crassly, that head, right?
Yeah.
And it's so true. And like, I'm all for taxidermy and all that. And, but there's a lot that we can, especially nowadays between the iPhone and DSLRs and everything in between, a lot that we can capture that is a huge part of the experience, and we can share those with everybody.
Yeah. Especially when you go on a 4-man hunt and only one guy gets to bring the rack home or whatever, right? If they even want it. But, actually I was listening to the radio. I don't know if I mentioned this at all, but there's 2 ladies that were kind of like doing I don't know. They basically go hunt other people's houses and garage sales for little trinkets that they put in their living rooms and all this. And they went on this big 15-minute interview about how, what makes your house is the stuff that's unique and the stuff that kind of calls to you. And you just fill your house up with that. Like that, we've been doing that for thousands of years.
Right.
And then the whole time they were talking about that, I was wondering if they would appreciate a mule deer in the living room, but it's the exact same thing. It's just for, obviously, I don't think they were hunters, but that's how we kind of look at that stuff in our house too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So the Journal of Mountain Hunting leads you into Beyond the Kill, which is your podcast. What inspired that? Is it just you're already talking to these people, so you might as well line them up to get them on the podcast, or was there some other inspiration for it?
Yeah. So from the beginning of launching the digital magazine, we ran a column called Blazing Trail, which was interviews that I would do, via phone with, so-called trailblazers in the industry, right? People that had, paved their way in the outdoor space. Sometimes hunting, sometimes not. And so I was doing that already. At that point, so the journal launched in August 2014, and I was not consuming podcasts yet, but was doing these interviews. And then the whole podcasting thing kind of hit big, and I started to consume a lot of them myself. And then, it was another one of those things where I'm like, shit, I'm putting a massive amount of work into, conducting the phone interview, getting that transcribed, and then getting that, and this would be me doing the editing, editing that transcription down to, readable English, not conversational English, which is surprisingly, like, you don't think of it, but when you see those words on paper, it's almost like gibberish.
Right.
So it takes an immense amount of work. I mean, be hours and hours and hours for an interview. And so as I started to consume more and more podcasts, I was like, well, shit, like, why wouldn't I do this, right? And I was having these amazing conversations with guys like Jim Shockey, Stephen Ranella, Remy Warren. I mean,
nice.
The list goes on. And as a side note, that was one of the things that was so amazing about this industry. I mean, I was and still am nobody in the business, right? I'm just a guy that loves this stuff and wants to kind of share a version of the hunting story, right?
Yeah.
It's not the only version, but a version of what we do when we go out hunting. And like I emailed like info@jimshockey.com or .ca or something like that. And I got a response from him like 48 hours later.
Nice.
Right. And Remy, same deal. And Ranella, same deal. Like everybody just was so open to talking, right?
Yeah,
sharing information, right? So I was having these amazing conversations and then, it took me a while to kind of get over the hump to say, like a podcast is the next sort of piece to this puzzle. And then I delayed that forever. I think I was telling you this, Mike, in one of our first conversations. I wanted to start a podcast at least 6 months before I did, but took the stupid approach of like, I'll just figure it out myself, DIY, self-edit, all that sort of stuff. And, to the question about photography, one of the reasons I don't really dive into photography is I'm not an overly technical individual. And every time I'd sit down to try to figure out recording software, I'd find some excuse not to do it. Right. So eventually found an outsourced company to do the post-production work and then just kind of went for it.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. Podcasting is such a cool thing. And it's still surprising. Like it seems like podcasts have grown in popularity quite a bit over the last, 3-4 years or whatever. But there's still the odd guy that's like, oh, what's a podcast? How do I get those?
Yeah.
Like, do you have a smartphone? Yeah. Well,
it seems like a lot of
got
work.
access.
No, you just hit the subscribe button and it automatically pop up on your phone. Oh.
But yeah, even like I got my mom hooked up with podcast. It's like it opens up a whole new world of not just hunting, obviously, but just everything, man.
Yeah, I've been listening to a lot of Crime Town lately.
So I
love that podcast.
I've never listened to that.
It's like a mobster historical. They talk to all the old mobsters and stuff. I guess Providence, Rhode Island was the third biggest mobster town in the U.S.
Really?
Anyway, but yeah, podcasts, like anything you want to know about, there's probably a podcast about it.
Definitely.
And I find that it's the connection, right? You get that connection, and it's not really pushed. A lot of podcasts these days are just sponsored. You don't know who they're sponsored by sometimes, like the big news ones or whatever. They're still kind of but there's a lot out there that's just like the three of us, right? Yeah. All the podcasts we start are just, we would do it because we like to do it, and I think people appreciate that rather than flicking on the TV and who knows.
Well, and it's such an interesting thing, right? Because you can get like it's probably, who knows, maybe I'm way off on this, and I'm biased because I love podcasts, but it's such an incredible source of information, right? You can go and for free get the world leaders or the world leader in a subject matter, in whatever length of podcast they're doing, right?
Yeah.
Like literally somebody who has spent their lifetime learning a topic, and you can learn from them, right? Or so you've got that at that end of the spectrum, and then like you said, Kelly, you've got guys like us who are just doing it because we love the subject and want to chat about it and talk to cool people about it. And so you kind of have that grassroots side of it as well, right?
For sure.
Yeah. And then there's obviously a huge spectrum in the middle, and it's just I like my wife, again, talking about HBC, she's just like, are you listening to another podcast? Like I haven't listened to the radio in the truck for probably 3 years.
Yeah,
right?
likewise.
Because why would you when you can either get entertainment, like Crime Town, something like that, or a host of other podcasts, or you can learn something, right? And it's just like there's no drive that's not where I don't have a deck of podcasts downloaded and ready to.
Yeah, I won't leave until I've got you get 15 podcasts downloaded if I'm going on a long road trip somewhere or whatever.
Yeah, totally.
For sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
So you mentioned you got 2 little ones, right? And I get a bit of anxiety because I know Kel's hoping for some kids one day. We've lost a few hunting partners to children. How do you find a balance between having young kids at home and getting out there? This question's for Kelly, obviously, but it ends up being me by myself. If he's tied up at home.
He's going to write this down.
You're the last one, Kelly, that's going to fall off the radar here. I'm not going to let it happen.
Yeah,
this question makes me want to pop.
Yeah, I was going to say, definitely open another bottle of beer for this one. I think the short answer is that there is, unless you're really lucky, and my wife won't listen to this, so I'm good. But point being that, there is, I don't know that there's enough hunting for, guys like us and probably a lot of people that listen to this, right? If I could go every August or every September for a month up north, I would, like, no question.
Yeah.
Now that's without a family. So finding a balance, I think, is pretty tough, especially in the early years. The key is, please, I think you just kind of lay that groundwork ahead of time, right? I mean, my wife was well aware of just how over the moon obsessed I was with this whole world before we had kids. I don't know that she expected me to say, oh yeah, I'm still going to go away for 10 days at least once every fall. Right. Which, I get one big trip a year and then I'll piece together a couple of, weekends or that sort of thing. So definitely don't get out as much as I would like to, but, I think the key is just, that it doesn't come out of left field, right? That they, your better half knows that, it's obviously an important part of your life. And, some of my buddies roll their eyes at me when I say this one, but like, I really do feel like it does make us better people in a lot of ways, right? Like whether it's the stress relief or just the the break from the hustle and bustle and the busyness of everyday life. And the same goes for the wives in the situation, right? Or the the partners, spouses, whatever.
Yeah.
Is getting my wife was just away a couple weekends back for her first girls' weekend, which is for the May long weekend.
Nice.
And I was been saying to her for years, like, I mean, easier said than done when you got 2 young kids on the female side of the equation. But, as soon as you feel ready, like, take your time, right? Because I think that's important. But, I know guys who kind of do what they want, right? And have, whatever spouses, wives, partners that are cool with that. And there's everything in between, right? It's a struggle for me because, like, I love to be out in the wilderness, ideally hunting. But it certainly changes your perspective. Like, there's a guilt factor to being away from the kids, right? But it's I think it's just something you gotta kind of figure it out in your own unique circumstance. I mean, the fact is, Mike, that the hunting buddies are the last consideration in that equation, unfortunately, right?
Yeah,
I think you're right though. Like the whole hitting the reset button, it makes you a better person.
Yeah, it's necessary.
Just in your day to day, right? You can't just keep doing the same thing, like going to work and coming home, going to work, coming home, going, like, you need to do something, and so does your spouse. And yeah, I mean, I think it's healthy if even for the spouses to kind of take some time away and
absolutely, do
some stuff. And there's definitely a spectrum though.
Yeah, no, and the hard fact of what the 3 of us love to do is it's not. I mean, you can do weekends, you can do an overnight thing, right? Of course you can, and we all do those. But you guys are going to go on this big. How long was the elk hunt actually? How many days was that?
It was 7.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, you quoted the Donnie Vincent quote when you came on my podcast, right? If you want to experience amazing things, you got to put yourself in amazing places. And that same, who we are short, he talks about, the longer you're out there, the more likely that is to happen. You're going to see amazing things, right? And there's something about being out there for, 5, 7, 10 days that is truly addictive, I think. And that's a hard thing to find a balance around, right? Yeah. We're very fortunate. We have both of our parents are still kicking around. So if I go away for a long period of time, one set of the parents is going to come in and provide support, right? And that's critical for us. I wouldn't be able to get away for some of my longer hunts without that. It'd be pretty tough.
Good. Taking notes, Cal?
Yeah. No, I don't feel.
I'm not too worried.
I'm not too worried, and the reason is because Randy's Bree's dad,
right?
So she's used to it. Yeah. Like every year he was gone all of October.
Right.
So she's mentioned, like, hey, if it's a little piece of each year. Yeah. It's not like you're going out all year and doing 10-day hunts every month. So,
there's something in it for the family as well, because you often bring something back. You're providing. Hopefully, you're bringing something back.
Not me.
Hold on, I got to get my pen out now.
Not me recently. So that's maybe that's why I'm having a tougher time.
It's easier to justify it when you come home with something, because
we've had the opposite experience.
Well, yeah, the first couple years
came home with a grouse.
A grouse. They're like, "Are you serious? This is what you come back with?" And we fried it up and shared it between the 4 of us. We're like, okay, nice work, boys.
We literally unpacked the truck, threw everything in the garage, walked in the mudroom there, took my shoes off, started the pan, fried up the grouse, split it up between everybody, and then you guys drove home. That was the reward of that.
Couple bites each and went home.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's funny when we did the elk hunt, it was getting to the point, because it was a new area for us, and like the days were kind of going by, we're not seeing a whole lot of stuff. We're like, fuck, if we go home with nothing, like this is gonna be it. This is gonna be the last hunting trip we're able to go out on. But
that's why I wasted no time with that whitetail doe.
Yeah, exactly.
On day 5, after seeing nothing for 5 days.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It's like, man, we got to get something. Oh, there's a whitetail doe.
Done.
Yeah, done.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
Yeah, no, you gotta strike. Gotta strike when you get the opportunities, right? I had a lot of success/luck in my first few years of hunting in BC, and either myself or the guys I was hunting with, and have been on quite the dry spell for 3 years, I think now. Been doing some, whatever, I guess, toughish hunts, by choice, of course. So sure, that's part of it, but I definitely haven't had the bird in the hand moment in a while, right? I think anybody that sneers at somebody for whatever it is, dropping a white-tailed doe or
it's still food, man.
It's still food, and usually better food than some monster buck or bull or whatever, right?
Because so there's two aspects. Like one of it's filling your freezer, and the other one's kind of going for that big,
just getting some groceries
experience, whether it's a big elk or a mountain goat or whatever, right? So I think that's one thing I think about is, you can go spend 10 days on a mountain goat hunt. At the end of the day, that's not much meat for 4 guys to split up, but it's a totally different narrative, right?
Yeah, no, it is,
and everybody agrees to it up front. So and there's reasons for doing either one. Yeah. So
I really like. For me, we live in such an incredible place, right? With such incredible opportunities at, minuscule costs compared to what most people would have to spend. Almost everyone would have to spend, obviously, other than those live in this province, to come and experience. And, I never used to really get the whole notion of like the Super Slam, right? Like the North American, I don't even know if it's 24 or 29 or something like that, right? Yeah. And then I started to go on some of these different hunts for different species that weren't quote unquote successful, i.e. bringing an animal or meat home. And then on one of these hunts realized that, obviously, the reason the podcast is called Beyond the Kill is, killing's a big part of why we go out there to do that and bring home meat and, have a good time and all that sort of stuff. But being in these different landscapes, hunting these different species and going through the process of learning about those species before the hunt and then being there, with them in their terrain and, making the mistakes that we all make when you hunt a species for the first time. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That in so many ways is a huge part of the trophy, right? Is that learning experience. Yeah. And so, I've been of late really focused on, because I've got this limited time, for these bigger trips, of just, trying to just get as many experiences as possible so that I can kind of solidify, how and where and when I want to spend my time as time goes on. Right. And in the not too distant future, I'm going to want to take the boys out, right? Mm-hmm. Hopefully they're going to want to hunt, but one would assume they would. I want to be able to share, my experiences and my lessons with them as much as possible, and kind of figure out, how we want to spend our time together. And of course, they'll start with, deer and the typical stuff, right? Yeah. I was talking to you guys when we had beers, just 2 weeks ago? Yeah. About that one place in Spatsizi where, like, without a doubt, is earmarked as the first, like, kind of wilderness hunt I'll take, one of or both boys on at some point. Nice, and that's, I would never would have learned that, right? If I hadn't gone into Spatsizi and had an absolutely epic hunt in there, right? So
yeah, for sure. Living where you're living now, I think you've got a pretty good chance at putting something in your freezer early on.
I sure should hope so.
Yeah.
You applied for the antlerless mule deer back there?
Yeah,
I got that last year. And it's like, it's easy pickings.
Yeah. Oh,
it's
it takes the pressure off the rest of the season where it's like, I'm going to do that mountain goat hunt and I still know I'm going to have a deer in the freezer.
Yeah. No, that's one of the things that, like, I'm just so enamored with about living where we do now is, being, in the big city of, in the greater Vancouver area. It really was like it wasn't a one and done. I'd usually get, spring bear sort of, weekend hunt. Maybe a deer hunt of late. That's not been happening because I've been sort of banking that time for longer northern trips. But you don't really have those, leave in the morning, come back in the evening with good chances, or just driving, logging roads. You don't have those chances around Vancouver, right? But here, like you said, I mean, geez, funny story is, so we moved here last July, and at some point in early September, decided I want to take a hike out just for the day with the bow in the park. and get up real early, loading my stuff up, and open up the door, and I hear something. I look across the street, and there's a mule deer doe, literally like 5 yards away. And I kind of look up and down the street. I'm like, oh man! And then I don't see a deer all day,
Right.
in the park, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, no, there's lots of opportunity.
Yeah, for sure.
The only deer I see usually with my bow are the whitetail I spook from 200 yards away.
Yeah.
Because I'm looking for mule deer, and yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. And again, the nice thing about being here too is like most of what I do, well, you're self-employed as well, but most of what I do kind of happens like in the afternoons and into the evening. So I'll get up super early. I'll go out for a hunt till about like 11 o'clock. I'm usually back at the vehicle. And that's what happened when I got my buck last year. It was kind of not the best planning because I had a bunch of stuff booked for the afternoon, but I called a bunch of guys and said, hey, can you look after the studio for me tonight? And called Kelly, and he was able to come help me after work. But it's nice to be able to just kind of get out for the morning and then put in a full day of work after that too. Yeah. If you're able to.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, we're definitely spoiled. What else did you put in for LEH?
So yeah, the antlerless, muley, moose in the Kootenays.
Nice.
Goats again, where I went just this past February. That's north of Terrace. I feel like I put in for Ashnola sheep, Callies.
Nice.
And that's a low odds draw, but
Yeah.
I mean, geez, that's 2 hours to a trailhead from here, right? So
Yeah.
I figured why not? Is that it? Yeah, I think that's it.
I think that's pretty much. We didn't put in for moose or anything this year.
No, I think we're going to save that one for the year after.
Yeah. We've actually switched up our plans after we talked to you.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we'll discuss that more after, but
Not on air?
yeah. It's funny, we've been talking to a lot of people and getting a lot of the same information, and then we found some things out that sort of deteriorated our plan and thought, well, based on what you were telling us, we're like, maybe we should just really make that a focus for the following year.
Right.
And sort of scrap what we wanted to do. Being pretty vague here, but
yeah. I mean, you want to, it's the difference between hiking in and flying in is really what it comes down to.
It's a huge difference.
Yeah. And the animal you're going to be going for and the realistic aspect of whether or not you're going to be able to get it out.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, it's funny you say that, Mike, because after listening to the full, complete episode now with Randy, and he was talking about how they did it every second year, they do their fly-in. And I don't know, Spidey senses, I was like, I wonder if that's going to plant a seed for those guys. And because there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I don't want to say there's anything wrong with doing that at all, because you do have to be realistic, especially with those northern hunts. That said, it took me 2 years longer to get north than I wanted to.
Right.
Because when I talked about that buddy I met from Alberta, that I did a lot of my deer hunting with when I first moved to BC, he was a why not guy, right? Like, I was pushing to go north, wanted to go up, into the Choti Lakes area, anywhere off the Muskwa. Like, I was reading all sorts of stories in like BC Outdoors magazine about guys, hunting stone sheep on ridges and having 6-point elk bugling at the timberline below them, and just like, my God, this is heaven, right?
Yeah.
I have to get up there, right? And he was just like, oh no, we don't know what we're doing. It's going to be too expensive, or I don't want to go up there unless we've got a mentor or someone to take us.
Right.
And he was like my only sort of hunting contact or buddy. And I think I ended up going with another good buddy who was a complete newbie to big game hunting. Had done a ton of hunting, like bird hunting, that sort of thing. But he was a why the hell not kind of guy, right? And he was just like, yeah, let's go. Let's figure it out. And we, were horrible on so many levels. We're really lucky and got a great elk the very first morning. But we did so many things wrong, right? But you just got to go and learn, right? And I think, and that's the thing that, I fear with a lot of people is there can be this whole like wilderness mountain thing can be intimidating at times, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of things to think about, safety and gear. And I mean, geez, we could spend hours doing, talking about just that stuff. But sometimes I think you just gotta go, right? I mean, you gotta be, practical and make sure that you can, whatever you're after, you've got the time to get it out, and it's within your budgets and all that sort of stuff. But like, I guess what I would say to anybody listening is don't not go because you're scared or
Exactly.
you don't know, you don't think you know what you're doing. I can tell you right now, you don't. Nobody does.
Yeah.
Even if they think they do their first like real wilderness or mountain hunt. But you're gonna learn more in a week to 10 days than you will, researching online or talking to people or listening to podcasts for years, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
definitely. Yeah, and I think I think that's why Kelly and I make a good pair, because I'm usually the one that's pushing, like, fuck it, let's just do the craziest thing that we can think of. And Kel's like, well, hold on, maybe we should consider a few things here. And it's good. And I think the conclusion we came to with this northern hunt is like, yeah, it'd be possible, but if we're going to put in all the time to go up there, we got to increase our odds as best we can. So the nice thing is we've done all this research. We know a ton about the area now. And how we want to approach it, the times that we probably want to go in. And now for next year, we're going to have a really solid plan, which is great. And that's why you start early with these things. Like we started talking about this stuff, it was probably back in January when we first,
February.
kind of brought the idea up, and everybody's, looking at maps and reading forums for information and stuff like that. And slowly, it was looking good. And then there's like, what about this? And then that issue kind of got bigger. And it's like, well, there's so many question marks as far as like, we drive up there, this bridge might not even be there. So what do we do at that point? And we had, Garrett and I were talking about a plan B and stuff like that, which would have been good too. But then it's one thing to go to the Kootenays, which aren't that far from here, and just, pick a spot on the map and say, yeah, let's do that. But when you're going way up there, it's a totally different story. So,
and I think it was like for us in this trip, it wasn't necessarily the safety aspect, but more the, like, we want to make sure we get some meat and increase our odds. And
we want to come home with something big if we're going up there. That's not, it doesn't matter if we don't, but if we can, we got to be able to pull it out of there too. So I don't know. I think it goes back to that spectrum of like, of on the meat side or the trophy side, as much as we don't like to use the word trophy, but I think there's advantages to both sides. And at this point, I think we're more on the meat side. Yeah.
But we also applied for the same sheep that you did.
Yeah. So
actually, I applied for one that's just a bit more to the east as well. I think it's got a little bit better odds.
Oh, really?
But I don't know. There's still a little bit of time to go over everything on that one, but I think you're right. We've kind of shifted because we think that we can increase our odds by doing something a little bit different and still get the experience that we want up there.
But is it a time-based issue? Like, are you worried? Like, how many days did you set aside to do it?
We had
including travel.
10 days.
10 days probably.
Like that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so the possibilities of whatever, a bridge being out and not being able to make good use of that time, if you did need to go to a plan B, C, whatever, that's the biggest hurdle?
I think so, yeah. And there's a few things. It kind of comes down to like, we had our sights set on caribou, and it turns out the time that we had booked off to do this is like after the rut.
Yeah.
And we, like, our elk was post rut and it was fine, but we've heard from a number of people that caribou is just like disgusting. And usually I'm like, yeah, whatever. You're probably just not like cooking it properly or preparing it properly. We heard it over and over again. Like, it's
most
atrocious.
consistent.
Yeah. So that was one of the main things too. And there's a whole bunch of factors really that.
And then the moose thing, like obviously we'd like to get a moose, but there's no way we're going to pack that out.
Yeah. So now we've got some, our hunting partner Garrett just picked up an 8-man TP from Kafaru.
Nice.
So we're going to have a chance to kind of like split the weight up between the three of us now and see how that feels with the stove and all that kind of stuff. And,
that'll be no problem.
And just really get a feel for all the gear that we have. So it's sort of like a mock run of what we'll be up against next year. I think that's kind of how I'm looking at it anyway. So it's close to home.
I say go north, boys.
We will, but I think we've kind of made up our minds
I
on
gotcha.
it. So
No,
yeah, you make some good points. So I mean, you're right. It's like when you go traveling and you kind of have an idea of not maybe even just some nerves of like, oh, well, what am I going to do when I get off the plane, or how am I going to find this train, or how am I going to find the hotel? And once you're over there, it's like, oh, it's just like exactly the same as when I was back home.
Yeah.
You follow the sign and you do this and that. Like when you're there, it's much easier than when you're thinking about what's going to happen when you're there.
Right. We're still going to do a 10-day backpacking trip, though.
Gotcha.
So just
I didn't
closer to home. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and so on the one hand, I say, go for it, but there's no question that the most important, like, personal hunting lesson I've learned in the past 2-3 seasons has been that I was kind of forcing hunts to happen, right? Because, in the past 3 years, as I said, we've had the 2 kids. I was, making, what should have been a 14-day hunt, a 10-day hunt, right? Or in, a 7-day hunt, a 5-day hunt.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I had a stone sheep hunt, including travel time, in 10 days. So it was, 8 days of hunting, more like 7.5. And of course, inevitably, this was in September, you lose some days to weather.
Yeah.
And that, that 7.5 became, 5 pretty damn quick, including, the amount of time you got to hike just to get where you need to get.
Right.
Did New Zealand last November. That was 10 days, including travel. Right now, the time difference kind of made that work, but we definitely could have, well, actually, I don't know if my body would have handled another day or not, but we could have used another day or two to probably get it done. And then this goat hunt in February was 5 days, which was way too short. But again, it's what I needed to do for the family side of things. And again, could work the flights that we made the most of those travel days, but definitely forced some hunts to happen that coming off of them felt shitty, right? Like it was 3 really important hunts for me. Ones I had really good information on, had high hopes, and came home. From a meat or animal perspective, empty-handed, far from an experience and lessons perspective, but definitely, force these to happen, which I don't regret at all, but definitely going forward, actually this year I'm not going north. First year I'm not going north in many years, is because I just want to make the most of the hunting time I have, right, and not make that all travel time. So I totally I'm being tongue in cheek when I'm saying go north, boys. But I completely get it, right? Like there's something, I mean, this is an obvious statement, but there's something to be said for, of those 10 days being hunting for as many days as possible, not, 20 hours on either end in a truck, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. I think we're just going to be that much more prepared, and we're going to make more of the trip next year when we do it. So
hopefully one of us gets that sheep tag, and that'll validate everything, right?
But that's the thing. It's like we talked about this when we were out for beers the other week there too. It's like we live in BC, so any hunt you do is going to be epic. Amazing. So
throw a dart at the map.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's
but the north has this whole other thing,
it's got something.
We'll get there
for sure. Yeah.
There is some gear that we still need. Like I mentioned on previous episodes, that there's no way I'm going up there with the pack I have now.
Just borrow Randy's packboard.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah. So I don't know. There's stuff like that. Shelters.
Yeah.
I mean, we got a 3-season. It's pretty good, but I don't know. The later you go, it's kind of a little bit sketchy. But now Garrett, like 2 days ago, bought this Kafaru tent, so that kind of solves that problem.
Yeah, that's pretty slick.
So there's things that seem to be changing kind of every week.
And don't forget, I was listening to Lander's podcast with you guys. That tip he gave about those the logs, like the pre whatever. Because I actually just sold. I had a 6-man teepee, a Seek Outside teepee.
Nice.
And I just sold it because we had a hell of a time getting wood to light in that stove.
Right.
A lot of that was because of the conditions.
Yeah.
And those were in every case were really, really. We got it going easily on a fall elk hunt. But in a couple of these winter hunts, it was literally impossible. So that, like, when I heard Lander mentioned that, I was just like, oh shit, I wish I'd known that.
Yeah.
Because it would have made life, worth every extra ounce or whatever it would have been to pack it in.
Yeah.
That was a key tip he gave.
Cool.
Yeah, and I guess it's not recommended that you do it, but Aaron Snyder does it all the time, apparently, and and totally recommends that you do it. And,
Whatever gets wood going in those stoves.
and
Yeah.
apparently
It's worth it.
Yeah.
I think he had mentioned sawing it up into thirds or something like that. Before you go to bed, you can throw a chunk in there too, and it'll keep you warm throughout the night, which is pretty cool. So those are heavy, those things though, but I guess that's why I was hoping Kevin was coming with us, because he's good at packing shit.
Yeah, we also lost a guy. So
To children.
Figuratively speaking. Okay, good.
He's still alive, but
The pause there was awfully
rookie hunter
morbid,
tragedy.
Kelly. I was like, should we pour a bit out right now? Or?
yeah. Couple for my homies.
So yeah, I don't know. We're down to 3.
Yeah.
But so.
Oh, weight wise, like the 8-man with the stove and that. I mean, we do
7 pounds, I think.
Yeah, that's no problem.
I can't wait to try that thing out. I think I'm gonna head back to trail to help him do all the seams and stuff like that too at some point.
Seams.
You seal all the seams and stuff like that on there. And
yeah. No, it's different. It's different camping open ground.
It'll be interesting.
Overbags. If you don't have overbags, like put aside another purchase. To have an overbag.
An overbag?
Yeah, like a bivy bag that it'll be like a waterproof, breathable membrane. They're not cheap. I think a cheap one's maybe like $180.
Yeah.
And they'll go up into like the high 2s and 3s for like the really fancy ones that are like ultra lightweight. But that's pretty critical in those, especially as you get into the late season. That open air scenario,
right?
Because you're going to get moisture and condensation in there. And you're going to get some, weeping or whatever throughout the night, depending on, how much the stove fluctuates. And that's been one of the most key pieces or key additions to my gear lineup recently was an overbag. Because then just, whatever, your bag can get wet and it's not the end. Well, your bag's not actually going to get wet, but you can get moisture condensation on yourself and you're going to be just fine.
Right.
Cool.
That's good too. Adam, you might as well tell us about this book that you brought, even though we've already talked about it before we started recording, but I think some guys might find this book interesting. I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, so it's a book called The Dangerous River by R.M. Patterson or Robert M. Patterson, but if you pop R.M. Patterson into Amazon, it'll come up, and it's his story, his recounting of his first forays up the Nahanni River Valley in the Northwest Territories. And he was one of the first, this was in the early 1900s, I don't remember exactly, but somewhere, let's say 1920s, it was after World War I. He was a World War I vet. British guy, came to Canada to kind of make his fortune. And just a fascinating life, like the kind of life that, very few men, especially in this case, but people lead these days where, was a soldier in World War I, trapper and prospector in the NWT, ends up, becoming a rancher in Alberta, and then goes on to be an author and wrote these phenomenal books. But it just is an incredible story. I mean, the story itself is just great. Like if you have any interest in the outdoors, and it's not like a hunting book in the strict sense. I mean, he hunts and fishes for a lot of his sustenance. And but just the woodsmanship, the outdoor skills, the canoeing skills, his observations, of the environment, are just absolutely incredible.
Just kind of flipping through here, looking at some of the photos and stuff here, and it just looks amazing. Pretty cool.
It's without a doubt, like for sure in my top 5 list of all books of all time. But as far as like outdoor books go, it's definitely my favorite. Like it's the one I give it out to people that come on the podcast. Is why I brought it over for you guys. Nice. Unfortunately, you guys have to share a copy.
That's all right.
But
work.
But it's just an incredible story. And then his other books are great as well. He's got a few of them, but this is of those I've read. I haven't read all of them, but a few of them now. And this is definitely the best one.
Awesome.
Yeah, very cool.
And it'll actually be good from the standpoint of pre-North.
Yeah.
Right?
You know what? We're going to read that and we're going to be like,
you're gonna change
we're going to go here and we're going to go here. Now we're going to go way up to Northwest Territory.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. You've done some hunting outside of BC. Obviously, you grew up in Ontario, but you kind of hinted at being in New Zealand for a hunt as well.
Yeah.
Which is, I think I've asked a number. I think Rachel had guided in New Zealand at one point too, and I think I was asking somebody else about it as well. Something about New Zealand, there's a real draw for me to go there.
Yeah.
And the opportunities for people from other countries are pretty wide from what I understand.
Yep.
So how was your experience there?
Oh, it was absolutely incredible. We decided to go guided on our hunt, and to your point, yes, as a non-resident, non-New Zealand resident, you can go down there, and frankly, I don't know exactly the regulations, so don't quote me on this, but I believe it's as simple as you apply for a permit and then you walk off into the wilderness.
Yeah.
I mean, there's all sorts of areas you have to apply for. I think they call them ballot blocks,
Right.
something like that. But we had a relationship through the website with a guide outfitter down there named Joseph Peter, who's a young guy. He's just tough as fucking nails.
Yeah, nice.
I mean, just insane. Incredible guy. Super sharp. Really, really has a passion for the country that is New Zealand, like most Kiwis.
Yeah.
But also the conservation side of things in New Zealand, which is entirely different from how we think of conservation here in North America. But spent a lot of his youth guiding on the big mountain glaciers in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And some people will know, a lot of people I don't think do, that Sir Edmund Hillary, the first guy to summit Everest, was a Kiwi.
Huh.
And a lot of people think he's Brit just because he's Sir, right?
Right.
But Kiwis have mountains like running through their veins, and they're just hard as nails people. So Joseph just encapsulates that sort of person. And so we went with him guided. 5 of us went down. Sorry, 3 of us went down. There was 5 of us in total hunting. Joseph and his assistant guide or buddy named Tim, who was a wildlife biologist down there, which was really cool to have along as one of our co-guides, right? And we just had an incredible hunt. We were hunting tahr. I mean, we could have hunted chamois if we'd wanted to. Wasn't really the right time for stag. I wasn't really too interested in stag.
Yeah.
And Joseph specializes in truly like wilderness free range hunts. And that's one of the things about New Zealand is, I don't know if you can say you need to be careful, but a lot of stuff you see come out of New Zealand, basically if it looks like, a stag that's a freak, it's not free range, right? It's raised on it could be a huge private ranch or private estate, right? But there's, a lot of, feeding going on, a lot of, I don't know what you would call it, bolstering of the genetics, let's say, with those real freakish stags that you see, true free range wilderness stags, would look like a typical 5 or small 6-point bull elk for the most part, right? But yeah, we weren't too keen on stags. Myself and my buddy James, who came, we were pretty fixated on tahr, and just had an amazing hunt. The country is beautiful. It is rough stuff. Like vertical gain in New Zealand is just insane. There's a reason a lot of guys and gals will use helicopters to get up on top and then hunt down. Is the climbs from the bottom are just punishing, absolutely punishing. Like, and James was a guide with one of the North Coast guide outfitters, is like a mountain goat specialist guide. He handled it pretty well, but he was even blown away at just how arduous these climbs, these hikes were, and it was mentally, physically exhausting and just awesome. Like it was a good time.
I've read that they drop like these sea containers all over the place in the backcountry as like survival huts. Do you know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. Did you guys make use of those at all, or? So
New Zealand has an incredible hut system that, and I'm quoting Joseph on this, and I've not corroborated these facts, so I have no reason to believe Joseph is incorrect on this, but somebody may throw up a comment on your guys' site saying, well, actually it's this. But as Joseph told it, these backcountry hunts, so these are real huts, like these are proper, like, kind of like one-room cabins, right? With bunks and stuff and a stove, were set up back when they started doing a lot of the culling in New Zealand with the wildlife. So an important point to remember about New Zealand is none of these game species are native, right? They were all introduced. Most of them have been there about 100 years now.
Right.
So, I mean, they've been there for a while.
Yeah.
And they've thrived because there's no predators whatsoever in New Zealand. But there's only, it's a country of 4 million people, right? And I don't know what percentage of that hunts, but, they have very long growing seasons. They have winters, but you can always tell New Zealand mountains when you see them in a picture because the line of snow will look like somebody like literally drew it with a ruler, right? They don't get snow below a certain elevation. I mean, pockets they do if they get some nasty storm coming out of the, out of the Antarctic. But for the most part, they don't get very much snow down in like the lowlands.
Interesting.
So these animals don't have a lot of winter kill, amazing vegetation to feed on. So they started to just run train on the landscape. So the government started a culling operation, and this is part of the legend of the hard bastard Kiwi. Hunter was these guys that get dropped somewhere by a truck and they'd go walking for miles and miles and miles and miles and miles through the mountains, and they built these huts. These guys had shelters to survive as they went through and just were like literally rampaging through these valleys, shooting deer or stags and other animals before they move on to the next one. And they still do that. I mean, there's a saying like the classic Kiwi bomb up, which is go into a valley, shoot 30 tar, maybe take a leg and a tenderloin and walk out, right? But that's considered conservation there.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, in one valley, we saw, somewhere between 200 and 300 tar. Right? None of them old, like sort of the age we were looking for and hunting for. Tons of, nannies and kids. So a valley that was distinctly out of balance, and the one side of the valley looked like it had been like scorched earth, right? Because they just overfed, right? And Tim, the Joseph's assistant guide, who was the wildlife biologist, 14 days a year, he flies around in a chopper and sits on the door and is given a Benelli autoloader and buckets of buckshot, and they just fly around to these valleys that you literally cannot hike into, like they're just so rough, and they just waste tar, right? And that's necessary, right? That sounds crazy to us.
Yeah.
But it's necessary because there are no predators there, right?
Years ago, before I even was into hunting, this is while I was going to school for audio engineering, I worked on a hunting show. And my job was to clean up all the audio and stuff like that. And one of the hunts was in New Zealand, and that's what they're doing. They were just picking off tar from like these steep cliffs. And then they would have like the slow motion the thing tumbling down the hill, which was just brutal, but I guess it's normal there. And that's kind of, your duty while you're there is to kind of take care of some conservation and get rid of some of these things. But it was just brutal.
It's a different world.
It is. No, it really is. Yeah. But I mean, that's a roundabout story to your question about the sea cans and the huts.
Yeah.
So I don't know how many huts there are. I remember Joseph mentioning it offhand at one point, but it's just an insane.
It sounds like it, yeah. So if you're in a survival situation, there's a good chance you'll stumble across one of them and you'll be okay. You'll be able to warm up. And,
absolutely, yeah.
So kind of a cool thing that they have there.
And they have a great like online and mapping system, so you know exactly where they are. Like it's
cool.
It's a country that absolutely like exudes the outdoors. Like when we were coming out this one valley, we'd stayed in this hut and then we went in deeper and stayed in this, as they call it, a bivvy hut, which is basically like a hobbit house. You could only even barely sit up in it. You had to be kind of crouched over, but I mean, you can survive a storm in it, right? And so we're coming back out of this valley, and there's a group of school kids, boys in their early teens, and they had as part of their sort of phys ed program was they had a 3-day fly fishing trip into this hut and fishing the rivers. And the school had fly rod, like we'd have basketballs and footballs and soccer balls in our gym room at the high school. These guys had fly rods and all that sort of stuff, right? And it's just like bred into them to hike like nobody's business,
right?
And just love the outdoors, whether that's like diving, like free diving, fishing offshore, fishing on, lakes, rivers, etc., hunting. And of course, seasons, at least the hunting seasons are year round. There are no seasons, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
cool.
It's a
Did
cool
you guys
spot.
do any fly fishing when you were there?
No, we didn't really have the time. And we were there in November, which is their spring, right? And we had, this is funny. So we, hike into the first hut day one, and it's just like torrential rain. Like, I mean, if you think we've seen rain in BC, like, fuck that. This is rain. And so we're just like getting the crap kicked out of us. And we've got some footage that's going to come out soon of I'm walking over this little knoll, this gust, literally like I've got to like dig my poles in and lean in to not get blown over. And this isn't like up on like an exposed ridgeline,
right.
5,000 feet. This is in like the valley bottom.
Totally.
So we get this nasty system come in, and this is typical for New Zealand. They just get hammered by these systems that just swirl around the oceans, right? And the various, what would you call them? Not ocean systems. Brain cramp here.
I don't know.
Like
how all the
typhoons or something.
Yeah, well, just how all the they've got like the
Jet streams.
Tasman Sea. What is it? Beneath, it's whatever comes out of Antarctica, and then out of the South Pacific. Like all these things conspire around New Zealand to just like hammer it with these crazy systems, right? And so we get to the hut, we start drying out, and we turn to one of the guys, Joseph or Tim, are like, "Oh shit, that's a lot of rain! Like, how much do you think that was, right? Because for us, we hear like a 40 mil day, like coming from the coast, like that's a huge day, right?" And he's like, "Oh, I don't know, not too much, 150, 200 mils."
No.
Right. And like this guy's a biologist, right? He's not just being a shithead and making it up. And he's like, "Oh yeah, we get 400 mil days on the West Coast." We were on the eastern side of the Southern Alps, but so it was pretty, to your question, Kelly, it was like massive spring freshet there. Like the rivers were nasty, like they have really good like wire bridges set up. So you don't have to do a lot of your own crossing, right? Because like hiking, or as they would call it, tramping, is such a key part of the New Zealand, both tourist culture and the culture itself. They've got these, suspension, they're pretty sketchy, but these, sort of wire suspension bridges across most of these rivers, and all these routes to these different huts and that sort of stuff. So you could get across them, but it would be a hell of a time trying to fish it.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah. I heard they got big trout down there, though.
Yeah.
There's no predators, like you said.
Yeah, no, there's some big browns that come out of there.
Awesome.
Nice. Well, what have you got for plans coming up? Just for hunting, for travel, anything exciting coming up?
Travel-wise, gonna get into the Kootenays for a scout in mid-July.
Nice.
That's scouting trip for a planned elk hunt in mid-September. Nice. Hopefully time the peak rut fairly well. So get out for a couple of days for that. Hope to get out for bear again here soon. Got out just for a day, as we talked about.
We got to get out again too.
Yeah. So hopefully can make that happen. I'd love to get somewhere a little bit higher, especially with the temperatures we've been having. Hopefully that'll be more realistic. Higher meaning like up into more open country.
Yeah.
But we'll see if that pans out or not. And then for the fall, pardon me, as I said, I've got that elk hunt, and then we'll just see what the LEH draws bring. I mean, for sure going to take advantage of all the deer opportunities we were chatting about locally, to get out for a day or an afternoon or morning, just wherever I can, right?
For sure.
But my main sort of focus hunt for this year is this elk hunt in the Kootenays.
Nice.
So,
awesome.
Well, good luck with that.
Excited. I mean, I think I was saying this when we had beers, that when I first moved here, the Kootenays were how I now think of the North, right? They're this like hallowed ground of elk and mule deer and grizzly bears and black bears and epic mountains, and I both ski and snowboard, more snowboarding of late. So I've always kind of sort of paid attention to places like Fernie and Rosslyn and places like that, right? So I've had this fascination with the Kootenays for a long time, but I've never hunted there. That's not true. I did last year, but until last year, I'd never hunted there. So I'm really excited living where we now live to have that at, not at our fingertips, but pretty damn close.
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
Cool.
And so I'm pretty pumped to explore over that direction.
Nice.
Yeah, there's some cool mountain ranges back there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can't go wrong.
And definitely a lot of elk. Like as far as BC goes, I think that's where you want to be, right?
Yeah.
It's West Kootenays and then all the way east into the Flathead.
Right.
Yep.
I always mean to give guys a heads up on this, but we always like to end on a good hunting story. Have you got one ready for us?
You know what? I don't know why I thought of this earlier. This one's quite funny. So I was listening to a podcast. I was pretty sure it was a hunting podcast. You know what? Did Lander talk about like perception and how perception can be skewed with bears? And
was it Gritty? Maybe he's been on that one a few times.
Maybe he was on Gritty. I don't know, but it reminded me of this. This is actually from Spatsizi as well. So we have time. It's not too long, but
yeah, we got time. Yeah,
okay.
There's nothing else going on here today.
So we when we were in Spatsizi, there was 3 of us, and we hunted moose first day. One guy actually got a moose the very first morning, and so we had spent the rest of the day dealing with that. Got it back to the cabin we were staying in, and then the next day went up into the high country, and I was more keen on, not that I wasn't keen on moose, but I was more focused on goats and stone sheep while we were in there. We glassed some goats from the lake, and so headed up into the high country, and had found a nice little basin to camp in, and then spiked, went out from there and glassed and all that sort of stuff. And didn't see anything. It took us most of a day to get in. Went up to the height of land to do some glassing. Didn't see much that night. Slept there that night. Went up the next morning and glassed for hours. And I was seeing tons of goats. Like I probably saw 60 goats this first morning, but they were all nannies and kids. Saw a couple of loner goats way off, but the heat mirage was such that I couldn't really, really tell. And they were like, a valley over. Our one buddy was feeling it pretty bad from the hike in and from bringing down the moose the day before. So he'd stayed down in the bottom, was just going to kind of walk the valley bottoms in the hopes that caribou came along or something like that. And he was the one who'd shot the moose. So he was on, sort of laid back hunt schedule from that point forward. And so I'd said if I don't see anything really that enticing up here, I'll come back down, grab you. We'll break camp, drop down to the valley bottom, and scoot up the lake, because we'd seen goats a couple peaks over, and we knew there was a horse trail that would get us at least that direction. Then we'd have to bushwhack and see if we had an approach on them, right? So anyways, I'm coming back into camp and come over the rise, and I don't know, a few hundred feet above camp, and I can see our tent, and I'm hiking down to it. It's I don't know, let's call it early afternoon, and I'm looking, I'm like, shit, I don't see, Colin at all. It's, maybe that bastard's taking a nap, right? And all of a sudden I hear, Adam. And I'm looking around, and he's wearing camo, so it takes me forever to find him. And then he's like up, we're in this big bowl, and he's sort of up to my right, but back up a couple 100 feet higher than I'd already hiked down. And I'm like, I kind of look at him, I'm like, what? And he's like mouthing something, and I'm like, I can't hear you. He's like, Grizz! Right? I'm like, oh, fuck. Okay.
Yeah.
So he's like waving me over. So I go hiking up to him, and I'm like, and he looks like he has seen a ghost, right? And he's like a bear wary dude. Like, he's not cool with bears. Mm-hmm. And we'd seen a ton of bear shit. Like, Spatsizi's known for being a very, very high concentration of grizzly bears. I think it's one of the highest in the province. And maybe the highest in the interior. I think that might be accurate, but someone will correct me, I'm sure. But so he was already pretty keyed up, and then he says he saw Grizz, right? And so I get up to him. He's like, "Yeah, dude, I was hiking back into up into camp from the valley bottom. I saw this big brown ass kind of just go walking up this creek and over the rise, and I lost sight of him in these big boulders. It was this sort of tarn lake and the saddle at with the bowls like this, and there's a saddle over here, and the Grizz had disappeared in these big boulders at the bottom of the saddle. And he's like, he was sniffing around camp for sure, man. He was like maybe 50 yards out of camp. So he knows we're here. Right. And I'm like, okay, I'm starting to feel a little bit antsy myself. And so I pull up the binos. I'm looking around like, I can't see him, man. Like, where did you last see him? He's like, oh, those boulders. Right. And so, he's like, well, what do you want to do? And so our other buddy, Alan, was still up glassing and hunting. I'm like, well, we can't break camp and have Alan come walking back in here by himself. Should we hike back up there and find him? I'm like, well, shit, I don't know what direction he went. And Alan's, a few years older than us, have been hunting solo in the mountains forever. you never know where he's going to go or where he's going to end up, and he's perfectly comfortable doing that. So I'm like, well, shit, like, what are we going to do? And Colin's like, well, we got to deal with it, right? And we all had Grizz tags. It's pretty much a gimme draw for Grizz and Spats easy. And so he's like, well, I'm like, did you see cubs? He's like, no, definitely no cubs. I'm like, well, obviously we got to be sure and all that. He's like, well, let's make our way around the bowl and see if we can spot this thing, right? And so we're moving, and it's kind of like there's a lot of little folds and crevices in the terrain, like not crevasses, but like just these little nooks and crannies where like there's really no super clear line of sight past maybe 100 yards, right? Every little hump you go over, it's like a 30-foot drop into some little gully, and it's just like, shit, there could have been a bear in there, right? So we're moving super slow, and we keep glassing these boulders. And anyways, we're moving along, both getting pretty keyed up, because like, okay, I keep turning to him. I'm like, did you not see him go over the saddle? He's like, no, I've been watching it since I saw its ass. It disappeared in the boulders. It did not go up over the saddle because it was just like no trees whatsoever, right? So we of course assume he's bedded, either one of these little folds or gullies, or he's in the boulders somewhere. And these are like, van-sized boulders, right? And so we're going around this bowl, and we're glassing, and he's a little bit ahead, and I'm sort of trying to pick it out, and pick out different folds and whatever. And then finally, I see him stop dead, and he's like, gives me like the get down sign, right, or hand signal. And he's like frantic, right? He's like waving his hands, he's pointing, and I come kind of crawling over, and then in between these two big boulders is this brown mound of fur, right? And the sun's on it, and I put up the glasses, and he looks at me, he's like, dude, that's a big bear, right? And I'm like, oh, fuck, you're right. And so it's, I don't know, at this point we range it, he's like 300 yards away, and he's like, I'm going to shoot it, and this is its ass. I'm like, dude, no, you're not going to shoot it. Number one, it's a 270 shorty. You're not going to shoot a grizzly bear in the ass with a 270 shorty. He's like, I'll just keep shooting. I'm like, no, like, we got to wait for it to wake up and, whatever, see what the deal is. Maybe he'll just walk it over the saddle, like whatever, right? And he's like, okay, yeah, you're right. And so we're watching him for a bit. We're sitting there, and time goes on, nothing happens. And it's getting on to like 3-4 o'clock right at this point. And he's like, dude, I do not want it to go dark with this bear sleeping there, because if he gets up, he's coming back to camp. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. We got to go deal with this thing, right? So I'm like, okay, well, let's slowly make our way in. It's going to get up soon. Let's just, spread out. You stay over here, and I'll come this way. And if he wakes up and heads back to camp, you'll get a shot. And if he goes up over the saddle, then I'll either have a shot, or he'll go up over the saddle and be out of our hair. And it should be noted that I had a 45-70 open sight, like Marlin 1895 guide gun, so I wasn't taking a 100-yard shot on a grizzly bear with this, right? So we get in a little bit closer, around 250 yards. We get in the binos. I even bring out the spotter, and I'm like, oh yeah, man, that's a big grizzly bear ass, and you can see his kind of fur going like this, right? And then the boulders are there, and it's like, shit, man, when is this bear gonna get up, right? It's getting later and later in the day, and now it's getting past 5 o'clock, and so eventually I'm just like, okay, I can't take this. Like, this has been hours of like watching this thing, of wondering what the hell it's gonna do. I've got a grizzly bear tag. I'm just gonna stalk in there, and I'm gonna throw a rock over one of the boulders. Like because the ground was so broken, I'm like, I knew I could get inside of 50 yards if it was still sleeping.
Right.
And there's lots of like whatever cover that I could get there. And I'm gonna throw a rock, it'll get up, I'm gonna shoot it, right? And saying it now sounds absolutely idiotic, right? But we were just it was kind of that point where it was like just get it over with, right? Because we were so keyed up that there was this bear, within a few hundred yards of camp, that we didn't know what his intentions were, whatever his or her intentions, I should say. So Colin sets up on this slope where he's got line of sight at just around 200 yards from it. And we didn't have radios or anything like that. And I'm like, okay, dude, I'm going to go around this far right-hand side, and I'm going to lose sight of him a bunch of times. So you got to, I'll keep looking back. You got to let me know if he gets up and starts moving my way. And so I start making this stalk in and get good wind and all that sort of stuff, and making my way in. And half of me is like, he's going to just, one of these folds, he's going to just poke his head up and I'm going to like either shit my pants or I'm going to, have to, whatever, make a shot. And, keep stalking in, sub 100 yards. I'm like, okay, I know I'm getting close, and looking back at Colin. And at one point he kind of like points at his eyes and is like this, meaning like he can't see him. I'm like, fuck. Okay. Like now it's on. Right. And so I find out after the fact that the bear had kind of moved or rolled over. Colin didn't have a spotter. He just had binos. My spotter was in my backpack. I don't know why I didn't leave him with it or leave it with him in hindsight. So anyways, I eventually get to about 50 yards from these boulders where we'd last seen him. And I'm looking back at Colin, and he's still giving me like I can't see, whatever, whatever hand gestures. And I'm like, where in the hell is this bear? And so I pick up a rock and I throw it into the general direction of where I think he is. And nothing happens, and I throw it again. And out from around the corner of this boulder walks the biggest fucking porcupine you have ever seen in your life. And I mean that like completely facetiously, because once he told me it was a bear, I would not believe it was anything but a bear, right? We got binos on it. I got spotters on it. We had boulders beside it, but just told me it was a bear, right? And it even had this like silvery, brindly back to it, right? It was all balled up, so like there was you couldn't see its head or anything, right? But we forever called that the porky grizz, right?
Nice.
Because it was.
So how big are these things?
It wasn't even that big. Like I'm joking when I say the biggest, effing porcupine you ever saw. I mean, it was a big porcupine. Like, I don't know, probably was 40, 50 pounds, something like that. But it was just how like perception was such that, and to this day, Colin swears he saw a bear, right? He swears up and down that he saw a bear, right? But he told me it was a bear. We see this brown thing in between these boulders that, from a distance looked big. And I was just vapor lock, right? It was just, that's what it was. Yeah. And, whatever, all the adrenaline started going. And luckily, I let the porcupine walk, of course. I wasn't going to waste the poor porcupine because we were idiots. But, oh man, like, anyways, we go back into camp and he's like, we cannot tell Alan this. We ended up telling him on the drive home. But we were just like hours of adrenaline for nothing.
That's
like,
hilarious.
felt like the biggest morons.
Now, we had that situation with the elk. We had hiked down, we had packed out a good portion of the meat, the four of us, and then we came back and it was around dusk, and especially when you get into the trees a bit more, it becomes pretty dark, even if it's lighter outside. But anyways, we came down, and as we came down through the trees, Garrett and I were out front a little bit, and Garrett's like, holy fuck, there's a bear right there. And he points at it, and it's probably like, 40 yards away or less or something like that. And I'm staring at this thing, and I'm like, holy shit, it's definitely a bear.
Looked like it had a snout.
It had a snout, it had eyes, it had everything, and it was just like a stump or a tree or something like that.
Yeah.
I can picture it in my head right now, and still I'm like convinced that was a bear, like no doubt about it. And it's right where the elk was too, so we're like, it's a grizzly bear.
Yeah.
And guns are out, everything ready to shoot this thing. It's like, you keep looking at it, it's not moving, and like, it's a stump. But totally looked exactly. And once you get that in your head, it's like you locked in. Like, that's definitely a grizzly bear. Well,
I think it's such a primal fear, right? Like, especially the grizzly bear, like black bear or whatever. Black bears are just as dangerous in a lot of ways, if not more dangerous. But there's just that primal fear about a grizzly bear that I think just affects you differently, right? And especially when you're in Grizz country, you've seen Grizz sign, you've got an animal on the ground, or when in our case, we were up in the high country in camp where there's no reason we would believe there. In theory, like, what the hell was a porcupine doing? 6,500 or 6,700 feet, right? Like, and that's how high we were, right? But there he was. But I think the brain goes somewhere where it's just like,
I think it's a primal thing. Right?
Yeah, no, it's fear. And then, but there's also this like, okay, we got to deal with this, right? Like you said, like, the guns come out and you're like, okay, me or him, right?
Yeah, totally.
So
Perfect.
Well, you wouldn't want a porcupine crawling in the tent either.
No, that's true. Yeah. I hear they're actually decent eating. I mean,
Yeah?
I don't know.
I'll have to try one out.
Yeah. Do we have porcupine season?
We do.
Interesting.
Yeah.
There's an actual season.
I think there is. Yeah. I think it was in the Kootenays. I think it was on there, and skunk and ravens and
Well,
yeah.
who knew? Yet more things add to the BC list, right?
Yeah. I could be wrong on the whole porcupine thing, but yeah. Check in on that one.
Yeah, the whole bear thing. It's kind of just like, well, why wouldn't there be a bear around?
No,
that
exactly.
tree,
Right?
Yeah.
So you kind of look at it two ways. But like BC is bear country.
Yeah.
So I try not to think about it too much, but at the same time, it's like you got to respect the land and the bears too. But
Definitely.
Yeah, no, our first trip up north was we were super, super, super keyed up on the bear side of things.
Yeah.
Like super keyed up. And I mean, I can't remember if I was saying this when we had beers that night, but we got ridden by jet boat by sort of friends of a friend, and this is our first like real north hunt, like, you know, well north of Fort St. John. Well, north of Fort Nelson for that matter, but well, not north, I guess technically west, but we got in the jet boat with this guy and his wife, and they're going to drop us off at this planned camp location, and he's like, or no, this was also Colin, my buddy. He's like, so what's the bear situation up here, right? And part of me was like, oh, come on, man, like we're kind of the city slickers coming up here, and the first question we really ask when we get on the river is about bears, right? And I thought he's going to give us some, you know, whatever, like, oh, roll the eyes, like, you know, you pussy, whatever, get over it, right? And he just kind of looks at us and he's like, this is the lesson you need to hear. If it's not running from you, get ready.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And this is a guy who's born and raised in Fort Nelson, BC, has, you know, been pipelining and hunting, and, you know, now owns multiple businesses up there. They call him the de facto mayor of Fort Nelson. I'm sure there is an actual mayor of Fort Nelson. He's not it, but he's a guy who's been there all of his life, has kind of seen it all, done it all up in the North Country, right? And I kind of look at him like he's just sandbagging us, right?
Your buddy's already loading his rifle.
Yeah, he's already pulling a new pair of undies. He's like, just 1 second. And then he goes, you know, into multiple explanations of some of the run-ins he's had, right? And the people up there I've met, at least, like, they take it really seriously, and it's not overbearing, like, you need to be damn scared, right? It's just like, no, like it's a real thing, and you just can't really, like, don't take it lightly. Don't let it, you know, ruin your trip or your hunt, but, you know, just always be thinking of them, right? Mm-hmm. And so we were super keyed up on that hunt. And then after that, and we had an elk in camp for a night because of just when it went down and all that, like hung in camp. And then after that, like, I don't know, I found that for me, at least, you kind of, I don't know what you would call it, but arrive at this position of, you know, if I want to do these things, then
it's part of it.
It's part of it. And, you know, you got to be bear aware, and you got to be, you know, alert, and, you know, you can't really let your guard down without sounding like you're all whatever amped up all the time. But it's just part of it, right?
It's a possibility, and you got to be prepared for it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Like Jeff had said, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. There's nothing you can do about it. And the odds of it happening aren't that high.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly.
But avoid it at all costs if you can. Yep. Don't be leaving garbage around your camp and a bunch of stuff like that, because they're going to come in
craft
there.
dinner in your tent.
Yeah, and you know, I think, you know, like when I think about when we put that moose down in Spatsies, we always had two guys working the moose and then one guy, you know, sort of standing guard, I guess, right? And he went down and as moose do in a shitty spot, right? A muddy sort of, not dried out, but sort of bay of this, you know, stream, and then it was just like tight timber right there, right? So not really great sight lines, and, you know, we weren't, you know, rushing or being stupid, but, you know, we just, you know, always made sure that there's always a, you know, gun nearby if somebody took a leak. Yeah, they didn't leave their gun 20 yards away, and we were taking breaks, and, you know, guys would trade off on guard duty, if you want to call it that, and working the moose. And I don't know, maybe some people listening are going to think that's too much, but it certainly makes you feel more confident when you know that you've got, you know, one guy. This is where, you know, 3 guys is actually a great thing, right?
Yeah.
2 guys working a moose is I mean, you need 2 guys to work a moose over, right? But if one's always kind of looking over his shoulder, then, or you're both always looking over your shoulder, then it's going to take a hell of a lot more time, right?
For sure.
You just got to take your time with that stuff, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
Good. Well, I got to get out of here.
Okay.
Before we go, website?
Website is journalofmountainhunting.com. That's all one word, journalofmountainhunting.com.
Perfect.
Podcast is listed on that. The podcast is Beyond the Kill. You can search that in iTunes and Overcast. It's not on Stitcher or Podbean yet.
Okay.
But we've just been slow to get that done.
Yeah.
But if you're not on an Apple product, you can just listen to it direct off the website. We've got a podcast tab on the Journal of Mountain Hunting website. That you can listen to it direct from there if you want, stream direct from there. So yeah, free subscription. Send out not a ton of emails. We don't spam you with crap and that sort of stuff, and just all sorts of stories and articles about hunting, both mountain. I mean, Journal of Mountain Hunting, yeah, but love wilderness stuff. Doesn't have to be like hardcore mountain stuff. It's just everything about getting out in the backcountry and having a good time.
Yeah.
Cool.
We highly recommend checking it out. So
thank you, guys.
make sure you do it. Cool. We'll put up links on in the episode description and on the website too. So
awesome. Appreciate it.
good.
Yeah,
We'll,
appreciate you coming down and bringing some beers and a book. And
Yeah.
we'll have you down again pretty quick, and we'll try to get out there for a hunt.
Yes.
pretty
Yeah,
quick,
that's got to happen.
For sure.
We should sync up offline about maybe bear outing of some sort or whatever in the fall
Definitely.
too.
Yeah.
But sooner than later.
We'll
Love
find a
it.
day to go out here for sure. Be
Yeah,
good.
time's running out on the black bear.
It
so-
Sure is.
Yeah.
Sure
Excellent. Well, thanks for coming in, man. And we'll be in touch for sure.
Yeah, thanks guys.
Cool.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.